I ran across a fun thread on Tumblr the other day on the real meaning of words, the real definitions of things that we say. For example, it said the real meaning of calories is tiny creatures that live in your closet and sew your clothes a little bit tighter every night. The real meaning of pets, the only members of your family you actually like. The real meaning of feet, they're a device used for finding Legos in the dark. The real meaning of the word teacher, a person who helps you solve problems you'd never have without them. The real meaning of latte, it's Italian for you paid too much for that coffee. The real meaning of single, a man who makes jokes about women in the kitchen. The real meaning of group project, time when you relax and watch someone who cares do all the work. And here's my favorite, the real meaning of WebMD, something that makes a mild cold into a deadly disease that will kill you within the next 24 hours. All right, here's a question. What would the real meaning of love be? That's what we've been looking into during this series. We've looked into the great love chapter of the Bible and the 14 choices that it gives us about whether or not you're actually engaged in loving someone. Last week, we looked at the importance of language in the Bible and then turned to look at the 5 specific love languages when it comes to emotional love. Well, today, as we're bringing the series to an end, because we're just taking 3 weeks on this, we're going to look at the 4 primary words in the Greek language for love. Now, you may be wondering, why would we do that? Well, the first reason is that it might help us think a bit more broadly about what we mean when we think of the English word love. Because unlike the Greeks, we don't have 4 words for love, don't have 4 nuances or types. We just have the one word, love, to kind of do all of that heavy lifting. And so we say, I love your dress. I love my dog. I love football. We roll our eyes and say, gotta love it. And then, of course, we turn to someone and say, I love you. Those are all different kinds of love. And even when we tell a person, I love you, that can be said to a wife, a son, an in-law, a friend, even though those are very different types of relationships. We just make the word love cover a lot of territory. The Greeks were smarter. They realized they needed more differentiation, so they came up with 4. But that's not the only reason we're looking into the Greek words here. The New Testament of the Bible that contains the life and teaching of Jesus and the writings of the apostles was composed in the Greek language. Everything you have ever read or heard cited from the Bible is a translation of either the original Hebrew in regard to the Old Testament, that was the language of the writers of its day, or translated from Greek, which was the language of those who wrote the New Testament. That's why scholars who do translation work study Hebrew and Greek. And that's the way it is for every ancient manuscript. The Bible's not unique there, whether it's the writings of Plato or the writings of Virgil. If you only read the English language, if that's the only language you're able to read, then a lot of stuff you've read have obviously been translations of whatever the original language was into English, such as the Brothers Karamazov or War and Peace. That would have been translated from Russian. If you read The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank sometime in school, then that was written in Dutch originally and translated. More recently, the popular novels by Stieg Larsson were originally written in Swedish, like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. So when people say, how can you believe the Bible with so many translations? It's kind of a misunderstanding of what a translation actually is. All ancient manuscripts are translations, and they have to continually come out with new editions, new translations, because of the evolving nature of modern English. So if we're going to understand what the Bible has to say about love, we need to get into the Greek, particularly since it has 4 different words for love, and every time we read it, we're just slapping in the word love in English. So let's jump in. The first word for love in the Greek language is storge. Storge refers to affectionate love. Most commonly, the love a parent would feel toward an infant or a child. It could also be used of the love of a people for a ruler. It could be used of the love of a person for a pet, such as a love for a dog. It's an obligation kind of love. Here's a taste of how it was used. This is from Paul in his letter to the Romans in the New Testament. He writes, "Don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection. That phrase, love each other with genuine affection, was built off of the word storge. In other words, there's an obligation to have this kind of affection within, as he was writing, within the Christian community. Derivatives are also used to describe an anti-affectionate mindset. In other words, where you refuse the obligation that you have to have this kind of storge love. For example, when the Apostle Paul was writing about people who have just completely turned their back on God, part of the description is, and they're going to be marked by having an anti-storge attitude. Let me read what he wrote. Since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. They are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, boastful. They invent new ways of sinning. But here's where the word is used. They refuse to understand, break their promises, are heartless, and have no mercy. That translation, are heartless, is astorgos, the opposite or absence of storge love. Literally, they don't have the natural affection. They reject the obligation that they would have to show affection where it's called for. Same way it's used in Paul's description of the end times in his second letter to Timothy. He says, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, and then without love. And that without love is astorgos, again, anti-storge, having no natural affection. The second word the Greeks had for love was phileo. This refers to brotherly love, and it's where we get our word Philadelphia, which is called, as you may know, the city of brotherly love, which, if you've ever been to Philly, makes absolutely no sense at all. It's anything but a city of brotherly love, particularly if you show up at a football game and you're wearing the jersey of the opposing team. But that's what the word means, brotherly love. It's the love you have toward a relative or a friend. It's the attraction of people to each other who are close to each other through friendship or family. It's about that kind of care and concern and fondness. This kind of love is talked about frequently throughout the New Testament. A good example is this in Peter's writings. He says, in view of all this, make every effort to respond to God's promises. Supplement your faith with a generous provision of moral excellence, and moral excellence with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with patient endurance, and patient endurance with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love for everyone. And those words, brotherly affection, are translated phileo. Again, are translating phileo. Again, love for people who are closely connected to us, maybe by blood or by faith. The third Greek word used for love is the word eros, which is where we get our word erotic. And as you and I'd imagine, it has to do with erotic sexual love. Eros is about desire and longing and craving, and it's probably the easiest of the four loves to understand. Now, I know you're really ready for me to give you some scriptural examples here. Just go home and read Song of Songs, and you'll get your fill of the Bible and sex. So to recap, in a very simplistic way, there is storge love, which is about family affection, almost a love that flows out of duty or obligation. There is phileo love, which is about friendship, a love flowing out of likability, shared interests, chemistry. And then there's eros love, which is about sexual love, which obviously flows out of attraction. Which leaves just one more, and it's the one I want to camp out on because it's radically different than the other three and is so critical to understand. The final word for love is most commonly pronounced agape. Though it can also be read as agape in the original Greek, most in the West pronounce it agape. This one really stands out and is the one for us to focus on the most. We get the other kinds of love. You know, we use our English words for them all the time, but not agape. It's almost a category that we don't even have in the English language. Agape love means selfless, unconditional love, the kind of love that's completely giving, completely sacrificial. Agape love is a love that has nothing to do with that which is being loved. It has nothing to do with the lovableness, the lovability of the person being loved. Agape love is when one wills to love, chooses to love, decides to love. So it's not about someone loving us out of obligation or attraction. This is a love that has nothing to do with anything we bring to the table. It's about the one who loves. It's like a man in a story that Henry Nouwen once told. He was trying to save a scorpion from a river that was flooding. And every time that he reached for the scorpion, which was dangling on a limb over the raging waters of the river, the scorpion would sting the man's hand with great force. And when someone told him the obvious, I mean, you'd be better off just leaving the scorpion, he's just going to get stung over and over. The man replied that he knew the scorpion would sting him. That was its nature. He said, but that has nothing to do with my nature to love. The word agape was never really used much outside of the writers of the New Testament. It didn't show up much in classical Greek. But in the New Testament, in those pages, it was just seized over and over and over and over again. It comes up again and again. The most used word for love in the Bible, over 300 times in the New Testament alone. And for one simple reason, that was the perfect word to describe God's love for us. The heart of the message of Jesus, the heart of the Christian faith, the one big idea coursing through the veins of the Scriptures is that we, you and I, are sinners who are fiercely loved by God. Meaning God's love has nothing to do with our lovableness. It's agape love. This is how Paul wrote about it in his letter to the Romans, as paraphrased by Eugene Peterson. He said, we can understand someone dying for a person worth dying for. And we can understand how someone good and noble could inspire us to selfless sacrifice. But God put his love on the line for us by offering his son in sacrificial death while we were of no use whatever to him. See, a Christian, a Christ follower, a believer is someone who knows this and has entered into that love relationship with God. God has one primary agenda for the world. It's his love. It's his forgiving love, his enduring love, his inviting love. The whole reason that Jesus came was for people to see and to know this love and to experience this love and to see and know what it means to be saved. In other words, saved from the separation from God and to have the broken relationship restored. And then we can have that restoration be taken care of because Jesus stepped in and took our place, took our penalty that should have come as a result of our sin and said he paid the price. It's a powerful thing to even begin to reflect on, that was what was done for us. C.S. Lewis, in his book where he talks about the four loves, writes this about the agape love of God. This is very moving to me. He writes, God, who needs nothing, loves into existence wholly superfluous creatures in order that he may love and perfect them. And listen to this part. He creates the universe, already seeing the buzzing cloud of flies about the cross, the flayed back pressed against the uneven stake, the nails driven through the mesial nerves, the repeated incipient suffocation as the body droops, the repeated torture of back and arms as it is time after time for breath's sake hitched up. And he simply adds, herein is love. There was a monk of the Middle Ages who was loved and respected by his people, and he announced in advance that on a particular evening he was going to deliver a message on the love of God. When the time for the service came, the cathedral was packed with the village people. And the monk came to the front, and he lit a candle, and he walked up to this life-sized statue of Jesus hanging on the cross. And without saying a word, he took the candle and he held it up to the nail-pierced hands. Then a few moments later, he moved the candle over to the side where his body had been pierced by the sword, the lance. And then he moved it up to the crown of thorns on his head, where it had been impaled there on his brow. And then the monk simply took the candle, put it back in its place, and he left the cathedral. Not a word was spoken, but the people never forgot the monk's sermon on the love of God. Another story. There's a movie recently released. You may have seen it. It was called Redeeming Love. It was based on a very popular novel by Francine Rivers. It was set against the backdrop of the 1850 California gold rush. And the story centers around a young woman named Angel who was sold into prostitution as a child. She survives through hatred of others and self-loathing of herself until she meets a man named Michael, who God impresses upon him to love this woman and to marry this woman. And so knowing she was a prostitute, he pays to spend time with her, not for sex, but to talk to her, to confess his love, to ask her to be his wife. He's refused over and over again, till finally he has to go back to the farm for a few days. And he returns a few days later, only to find her beaten. She had been beaten by essentially her pimp and was near death. He again begs her to marry him. And she says, kind of almost well, sure, why not, And he takes her to his home. He nurses her to health. She responds by treating him coldly, plotting her chance to run away again and return to the brothel and the life that she knew. She actually talks to his brother-in-law and gets him to, whisk her away, to run away to town. And he says, well, you got to pay me. And she says, what do you want? He says, sleep with me. And she just willingly says, sure, So she sleeps with him and has him take her away from Michael. Michael searches for her again, finds her working again in the brothel, brings her back to their cabin again. And, slowly she begins warming up to him over time, developing some real feelings for him. And then it kind of makes things shift. She knows that no one could ever really love her. All she can feel for herself is shame. She even has to tell Michael that, you don't want me as a wife. I won't be able to bear children. I've had multiple abortions, and then I had a surgery that made it so that I can't ever have children. And so she runs away again, feeling this time the runaway reason was because I can never be the wife that this man deserves. Michael finds her again, brings her home, assures her of his ongoing, continuing love for her that she just can't bring herself to believe. She runs away again, leaving the wedding ring this time behind, symbolic of saying you just need to find a different wife. She again finds herself in a brothel, but this time before she can re-enter her life of prostitution, she's rescued by a good and godly man who brings her to his family's house. She begins to attend church with them, and eventually she actually gives her life to Christ. And she begins to work with other prostitutes and begin helping them leave that life and begin anew. And then she learns that Michael never married, still loved her, hoped to find her, was still going out trying to find her. And so this time, overwhelmed with that, she goes home to him. She surprises him in the field where he's working, kneels at his feet, breaks down in tears, and didn't know what to expect, but Michael receives her with just this kind, pure, forgiving love, and they start a new life together. It's a beautiful story, and as the title would suggest, a story of redeeming love. But it wasn't original. The book and later movie was intentionally based on the book of Hosea in the Bible. God directed a man named Hosea to marry a prostitute named Gomer as a symbol of God's pursuing love for us. And she was unfaithful time and again, yet Hosea, reflective of God, kept seeking her out and bringing her home and holding out love until she finally saw that the love really was real. It wasn't based on her worth. It was based on the lover's heart. It was agape love. That's the love of God. It's the love of God toward you. Freely given, totally undeserved. Agape love is a love rooted in lavishing on us, not because we're lovable, but because the one who loves lavishes. I don't know if you've ever seen the theatrical production of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, or maybe the movie version. If you haven't, don't wait any longer. You need to immerse yourself in that. It's about an escaped convict, Jean Valjean, who was in prison for 20 years for stealing a loaf of bread. In one scene early on that sets the stage for the change in his life and so much else that follows, he's shown hospitality, kindness by a bishop, but the temptation is too much for him. He gets up in the middle of the night and takes some of the silver in the house, steals it, and steals away into the night. When he's stopped later by a constable and the silver is found, he tries to lie his way out of it and said, yes, it's the bishop's, but the bishop gave it to me as a gift. And the constable says, well, that's easily sorted out. And so he takes him back to the bishop, and Jean Valjean knows the jig is up. He's going to hear the words in just a moment that's going to send him back to prison for the rest of his life. If he was locked up for 20 years for a loaf of bread, what will they do stealing silver from a church? But as the bishop hears the constable asking and saying where he caught this man and what he had, he hears the last thing he could have ever expected. When the bishop hears the story from the constable, he turns to Valjean and he said, well, you're mistaken. Of course this silver was my gift, but only part. And he turns and he says, you forgot the most valuable parts that I wanted you to have. You didn't take the silver candlesticks. And he gives those to Valjean with his blessings. So instead of the condemnation that he deserved, Jean Valjean is blindsided by grace, agape, love-based grace. One moment, poverty and freedom, the next minute, the next minute, freedom and abundance. There's this pivotal scene before Valjean leaves. The bishop tells him something very important. He says, you must never forget this moment. Your soul and your life have been bought back. And it had. You know, all those stories that I just told kind of now, you do know they can be your story. You're the one God seeks to love despite how many times you've stung his hand as it reached out to you. You are the one God seeks to love despite how you have been living a life akin to a prostitute. In other words, abandoning him for any and every other love. You're the one God seeks to love despite, abusing his kindness, akin to stealing silver in the middle of the night. All of these stories are your story. The story of you and God. You know about storge love and phileo love and eros love, but have you ever entered into agape love? There are only two choices when it comes to God and his love for us. We can refuse it, spurn it, harden our will, close off our heart. We can turn our back on his love, or we can turn ourselves back to his love. Where are you? Have you turned yourself back and you've entered into that? Or do you still have your back turned? And where do you want to be? What do you want your relationship with this incredibly radical love to be? If your back has been turned because you just don't think God could ever love someone like you, or if you feel like if I ever did turn back toward God, I just would face rejection, or that somehow you say, well, I just know that I can't do that because I could never be accepted by God. Don't you see how wrong that thinking is? And that it's the very antithesis of what agape love is? Agape love, the kind of love God has for you, doesn't depend on you. It's all about him. And he loves you. He created you to express his love to you. As one person put it, it may be a very bad thing that I needed God to die for me. But it is a wonderful thing that God thinks I'm worth dying for. The only thing you need to bring to the relationship is just acceptance of the love. Acceptance of the one simple truth that guides God's purpose for the world. Let me just read you the words of Jesus. For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. God sent his Son into the world, not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. And yes, the word used there for God so loved the world, it was God so agaped the world. And as I will never tire of saying, if you want to embrace that love, if you want to accept that love, if you want to turn back toward that love instead of turning your back on it, it's one prayer away. A prayer that says something like, Jesus, I mean, I know my life's a wreck. I know I'm a sinner. I'm not going to play games with that. I believe, I need your forgiveness. I need to get this relationship right. I believe you died for my sins. I want to turn from how I've been living. I want to invite you to come into my heart, come into my life. I want to trust you as my forgiver and follow you as my leader. I want to experience your love for me. You can pray that anytime, anywhere, maybe even now. And I hope you will. There is love like no other, agape love, waiting to hear it and respond to it. So rather than me close this time in prayer, why don't I just give you the gift of a little time to maybe voice a prayer yourself, maybe even the one that we've been talking about.